There is a specific frequency of exhaustion that brought you to this video today. It is not the tiredness of the body, which can be cured by sleep. It is a deeper, ancient fatigue that lives in the marrow of your bones. It is the exhaustion of a soldier who has been fighting a war that never ends on a battlefield that exists entirely within the confines of his own skull. You have been told by gurus, by books, by the endless stream of high-vibe content on your screen that the enemy in this war is you, or specifically the part of you called the ego. You have been sold a story, a seductive, dangerous story. The story says that if you can just silence your mind, if you can just kill your identity, if you can just vibrate high enough to dissolve your personality, you will finally find peace. You will find God. And so you try. You meditate and you beat yourself up when your thoughts wander. You feel anger and you shame yourself for being low vibration. You feel pride and you crush it down, calling it arrogance. You are engaged in a perpetual act of psychological self-mutilation, slicing away parts of your own soul in an attempt to fit into a mold of enlightenment that was never designed for a human being. Let that sink in. Pause for a moment and observe your physical body right now. Do not change anything, just observe. Is your jaw unclenched? Are your shoulders dropped? Or is there a subtle vibrating tension running through your nervous system? That tension is not a sign that you are failing at spirituality. That tension is a scream from your unconscious. It is your soul reacting to the violence you are inflicting upon it. You are attempting to use the mind to kill the mind. It is a cannibalistic loop. It is a dog chasing its own tail, snapping at blood and bone, wondering why it hurts. The harder you try to kill the ego, the more crafty it becomes. It hides, it disguises itself. It creates a new identity based on being the person who has no ego, and thus the trap snaps shut. You are running on a hamster wheel painted gold, believing you are ascending, when in reality, you are just sweating in place. This is what we call the ego death trap. It is the great lie of the modern spiritual marketplace. They sell you the idea of death because it sounds final. It sounds like a solution. If the ego is dead, the pain stops, right? Wrong. Carl Jung, the man who mapped the darkest corners of the human psyche, warned us about this almost a century ago. He saw that those who try to ascend without roots do not go to heaven, they go to madness. He saw that the death of the ego is not enlightenment. It is a psychotic break. It is the collapse of the vessel that holds your consciousness. Why do you feel this resistance right now? Why does a part of you want to click away, to check your notifications, to skip to the how-to part? That is the skip reflex. It is a defense mechanism. Your programming does not want you to hear this, because if you hear this, the war ends. And if the war ends, the system loses its control over you. The matrix feeds on your internal conflict. As long as you are fighting yourself, you are distracted. As long as you are guilty, you are malleable. As long as you are trying to be holy, you are not being whole. We are here to dismantle the war machine. We are here to tell you that your ego, that noisy, fearful, arrogant, needy voice in your head, is not a mistake. It is not a demon to be exorcised. It is a biological masterpiece. It is a piece of cosmic technology so advanced that you have mistaken it for a curse. But before we can learn to use this technology, we must understand why it was installed in you in the first place. We must look at the physics of your existence. Let us strip away the poetry for a moment and look at the cold, hard mechanics of your existence. Forget about good or bad. Let us talk about physics. To understand why you have an ego, you must first understand where you are. Itzhak Bentov, the scientist and mystic who mapped the mechanics of consciousness, described this physical dimension not as a solid place, but as a medium of high viscosity. Imagine trying to run underwater. The water resists you. It slows you down. It forces you to exert energy to move even a few inches. This reality is thick. Thoughts do not manifest instantly here. Intentions take time to become form. Cause and effect are separated by the lag of time. In the higher dimensions, where your soul originates, there is no viscosity. You think of a location and you are there. You think of a concept and you become it. It is a realm of instantaneity. But here, in the 3D matrix, things move slowly. To operate in this heavy, slow, dense environment, you need a specialized interface. Imagine you are an astronaut preparing to walk on the surface of the moon. You do not step out of the airlock in your naked skin. If you did, the vacuum would boil your blood, and the radiation would burn you to ash in seconds. You put on a heavy, cumbersome, restrictive spacesuit. The suit limits your movement. It narrows your field of vision. It makes you clumsy. You cannot feel the dust with your fingers. You can only feel the gloves. Your ego is that spacesuit. It is not a mistake. It is a biological necessity. It is a focusing device designed to narrow down the infinite blinding light of your total consciousness into a single sharp point of laser-like awareness that can navigate the 3D world. Without the ego to filter reality, you would not perceive time. You would perceive everything happening all at once, eternity in a single second. You would be unable to drive a car, hold a conversation, or learn a specific lesson because you would be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Consider the stroboscopic nature of your reality. As we have discussed in the archives of this channel, consciousness is not continuous. You are blinking in and out of existence billions of times per second. You are a wave function collapsing into a particle over and over again. When you blink out into the void, you return to the source. When you blink in, you return to this chair, this room, this life. What brings you back to the same coordinate every time? Why don't you blink back as a tree, or a cloud, or your neighbor? The ego is the anchor. It is the gravitational glue of your identity. It is the software that remembers I am John or I am Sarah, so that the continuity of the game can be maintained. It locks your frequency into this specific timeline. To kill the ego while you are still in a physical body is not just impossible, it is a violation of cosmic law. It is an attempt to uninstall the operating system while the computer is still running. The result is not enlightenment. The result is a system crash. We see this in the tragic cases of psychotic breaks among those who force their awakening too fast. They blow out their neural circuits because they tried to channel the voltage of a lightning bolt through the wiring of a toaster. They lose the filter. They hear every thought, feel every emotion of the collective, and lose the ability to say, I. That is not liberation. That is dissolution. Pay attention to your breath right now. Feel the air entering your lungs. That sensation of expansion and contraction is a boundary. Your skin is a boundary. Your name is a boundary. Boundaries are not prisons, they are containers. Without a cup, you cannot hold water. Without an ego, you cannot hold a human experience. The problem, therefore, is not the suit. The problem is that you have worn the suit so long, you have forgotten there is a man inside it. You believe you are the suit. You defend the suit. You polish the suit. And when the suit gets scratched, you scream because you think you are dying. This brings us to the core of the deception. The Matrix does not want you to realize you are the astronaut. It wants you to identify with the suit so deeply that you become predictable. And the most clever way it keeps you trapped in the suit is by convincing you to decorate it with spiritual stickers. This leads us into the darkest part of the labyrinth, the moment the ego stops chasing money and starts chasing God. Now we descend into the most treacherous trap of all. This is where the path becomes narrow and the shadows become deceptive. Because the ego is cunning. It is a biological survival machine that has evolved over millions of years. It does not want to die. When you declare war on it, when you say, "I am going to destroy my vanity, my anger, my selfishness," the ego does not panic. It smiles. It simply changes its clothes. It takes off the suit of the materialist and puts on the robes of the spiritualist. This is the great shapeshift. The ego realizes that it can no longer get its dopamine hits from money, status, or validation in the corporate world because you have decided those things are unimportant. So it pivots. It decides to seek validation from a new source, its own holiness. This is what psychologists call spiritual bypassing, but we will call it by its true name, the Messiah complex of the shadow. It is the most dangerous disguise because it looks like virtue, it feels like righteousness, it sounds like wisdom. But underneath the white robes, it is cold, rigid, and deeply judgmental. Have you ever met someone who claims to have no ego? Someone who speaks in soft, breathy tones, who claims to love everyone, who says they only vibrate at the frequency of love and light? Watch them closely. Contradict them. Step on their toe. Deny them the validation they crave. Watch how quickly the unconditional love evaporates, replaced by a cold, sharp superiority. "I am more evolved than you," their silence says. "I have transcended these petty human emotions, and you are still stuck in the mud." That thought, "I have transcended," is the ego screaming in triumph. It has co-opted your spiritual practice to build itself a taller pedestal. It is no longer satisfied with being rich. Now it wants to be God. This spiritual ego is harder to dismantle than the worldly ego because it is protected by the ultimate defense mechanism, morality. It hides behind concepts of karma, vibration, and oneness to avoid facing its own darkness. It creates a split in the psyche. It labels certain emotions as bad or low vibe. Anger is bad, fear is bad, jealousy is bad. So when these natural human emotions arise, as they must, because you are a biological organism, the spiritual ego does not integrate them. It suppresses them. It shoves them into the basement and locks the door. This is the whitewashing of the soul. You are painting over structural rot with gold leaf. Carl Jung saw this in his patients time and time again. He called it the regressive restoration of the persona. You trade a worldly mask for a spiritual mask, but you remain just as asleep. You are still acting out a role. The script has just changed. You are performing spirituality rather than embodying it. Ask yourself this question and answer it with the brutal honesty of the void. Does my spirituality make me feel superior to those who are asleep? Does it make me feel special? Does it make me feel safe from the messiness of human connection? If the answer is yes, you have not awakened. You have simply moved to a more expensive cell in the matrix. Notice the sensation in your stomach right now. Is there a knot? That is the fear of being found out. That is the ego realizing its disguise is being stripped away. Stay with that discomfort. Do not run to affirmations. Do not run to positive thinking. Those are just painkillers. We are performing surgery, and for the surgery to work, you must feel the wound. Because here is the truth. A spiritual person who has suppressed their darkness is infinitely more dangerous than an unconscious person who acts out their darkness. The unconscious person is like a wild animal, predictable in their aggression. But the spiritual narcissist, they are a pressure cooker waiting to explode. They have disassociated from their own humanity. And nature does not tolerate a vacuum. What you push down does not disappear. It grows, it mutates, it gathers strength in the dark, and eventually, in accordance with the laws of physics, it must recoil. Physics governs everything. You cannot escape the laws of motion just because you close your eyes and call it psychology. Newton's third law states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. This is not just true for billiard balls colliding in a vacuum. It is true for the dynamics of your soul. When you push the ego down, when you shove your jealousy, your rage, your lust, and your judgment into the dark closet of your subconscious to maintain your spiritual image, you are not destroying them. You are compressing them. You are creating potential energy. You are winding a spring tighter and tighter. Carl Jung had a specific word for this phenomenon: enantiodromia. It is the tendency of things to turn into their opposites when pushed to the extreme. The harder you try to be a saint, the more you feed the sinner in the basement. You are not eliminating the darkness, you are merely pressurizing it. And eventually, the pressure will become too great for the biological vessel to hold. This is the shadow recoil. And when it snaps back, it does not ask for permission. It does not knock politely. It kicks the door down. Notice the sensation in your solar plexus right now. That knot of anxiety that tightens when you think about losing control. That is the spring coiling. When the recoil happens, it often manifests not as an internal thought, but as an external disruption. This is the trick of the psyche. What you disown from the inside meets you on the outside as fate. You might suppress your anger perfectly. You never yell. You never fight, but suddenly you find yourself surrounded by angry people. Your partner screams at you, your boss bullies you, a stranger attacks you in traffic. Why? Because you have turned yourself into a walking magnet for the very frequency you are denying. You projected your shadow onto the screen of the world so you could finally see it. The monster you are running from is not chasing you. You are dragging it behind you. Think of the loosh farm concept we have discussed. The Matrix creates a system where you are constantly at war with your own nature. Why? Because conflict generates energy. When you are fighting your own shadow, you are generating massive amounts of emotional friction. Guilt, shame, anxiety. This friction is food for the system. A human being who is at peace with their darkness generates no friction. They're useless to the parasites. But a spiritual seeker who is terrified of their own ego, they are an all-you-can-eat buffet. The tragedy of the modern seeker is that they are building a dam against a river that flows from their own heart. They spend all their life force holding back the floodwaters of their own humanity. They become rigid, brittle, and hollow. They smile with their mouths, but their eyes are dead. They have severed the connection to their roots in a desperate attempt to reach the sky. But as the alchemists knew, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. If you cut off your roots because they are dirty, the tree dies. If you cut off your ego because it is unspiritual, your connection to reality withers. You become a ghost in your own life, present but powerless. Check your posture. Are you slouching, protecting your heart? Straighten your spine. Open your chest. We are about to stop running. We are about to do the one thing the Matrix is terrified you will do. We are about to turn around, face the beast, and realize it has your face. The diagnosis is complete. The trap is exposed. Now we must hand you the weapon. Not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of union. It is time for the protocol. So, here we stand at the precipice. We have established that you cannot kill the ego because it is your biological interface. We have established that you cannot suppress the shadow because it will recoil and destroy your reality. What is left? If we cannot destroy and we cannot repress, what do we do? The answer lies in the forbidden texts of alchemy. The alchemists were not trying to turn physical lead into physical gold. That was merely a cover story to avoid being burned at the stake by the church. They were talking about psychological transmutation. They were talking about turning the lead of the heavy, dense, reactive ego into the gold of the integrated soul. They called this the mysterium conjunctio, the sacred marriage. It is the union of opposites. It is not the destruction of the ego, but the illumination of it. How do we do this? We stop the civil war. We declare a unilateral ceasefire. We move from a strategy of extermination to a strategy of negotiation. This brings us to the protocol. It is a technique adapted from Jung's active imagination, but we will strip it of its clinical softness and use it as a weapon of clarity. We call this the boardroom visualization. Close your eyes for a second if you can. Imagine a boardroom, a long, dark table made of ancient wood. At the head of the table sits your higher self, the observer, the silent witness, the part of you that is connected to the infinite. That is the king or the queen. That is you. But the chairs are not empty. Sitting around the table are the fragmented parts of your psyche. The ego is there too, perhaps as a frightened child, an arrogant dictator, or a weary soldier. The shadow is there too, perhaps as a monster, a criminal, or a seductress. For most of your life, you have locked these characters out of the room. You have gagged them. You have pretended they don't exist. And so they have been banging on the doors, smashing the windows, and sabotaging your life from the hallway. The protocol requires you to open the door. You invite them in, you sit them down, and you ask them the most powerful question in the universe. What are you trying to protect me from? This is the key that unlocks the cell. The ego is not evil, it is protective. Its methods are outdated, childish, and often destructive, yes, but its intent is survival. That arrogance you hate, it is a shield protecting a deep wound of unworthiness. That rage, it is a bodyguard protecting your boundaries because you never learned how to say no. That addiction, it is a misguided attempt to soothe pain. When you validate the intent of the ego, you disarm it. You say, I see you. I know you were trying to help, but I am the captain now. I appreciate your warning, but we are going to do this differently. Do you feel that shift? That sudden release of pressure in your shoulders? That is the sound of the sword dropping. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are leading yourself. This is the state of the sovereign self. In the archetype of the kingdom, the ego is the prime minister. It handles the logistics. It deals with the roads, the taxes, the defense. It is necessary. But for most of your life, the king, your soul, has been asleep. And so the prime minister, terrified and unqualified, has taken the throne. He has become a tyrant because he was never meant to rule. He was meant to serve. Your job is not to execute the prime minister. Your job is to wake up the king. When the king returns to the throne, the ego naturally bows. It steps down. It hands over the keys. It returns to its proper station as a faithful servant of the divine will. This is what Jung called individuation. It is not the subtraction of the self. It is the completion of the self. You become a whole human being, one who is capable of great darkness, but chooses light, capable of great destruction, but chooses creation. Take a deep breath. Feel the air filling your lungs, expanding your chest. That is the feeling of space. You have room now. You are no longer crowded out by your own war. The Matrix wants you at war with yourself. It wants you fragmented, guilty, and ashamed of your own nature, because a human being who is fighting their own shadow is easily controlled. They will buy anything, believe anything, and follow anyone who promises to end the pain. But a human being who has integrated their shadow, who has made peace with their monster, they are uncontrollable. They are sovereign. You have a choice today. You can go back to the battle. You can go back to judging yourself for every negative thought, apologizing for your existence, and trying to slice away parts of your soul to fit into a spiritual box. Or you can open the door. You can invite the monster to the table. You can look it in the eye and say, "I accept you. Now sit down. We have work to do." Do not kill the dragon. Ride it. If you are ready to stop the war and start the reign, signal it. The algorithm will try to hide this transmission, to pull you back into the sleep of entertainment. Do not let it. Like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. These are not just digital metrics. They are signals of intent to the system that you are awake. Join us in the next transmission, where we will decode the architecture of the reality you are now ready to master. Wake up.